All right, we have got a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to Classics 160D3, Classical Mythology, and today's lecture on Apollo, the god of music and healing, and the sun, and much, much more, as well as Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. Let's go ahead and see what we got on the docket. A few announcements. I'll talk a little bit about the review session on Wednesday, as well as the exam on Friday. We'll recap a little bit about drinking wine in Greece, one of the best things in the world to do. If you can find any way to make this happen, absolutely do it. And then we will talk about the twins Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and Apollo, the god of music and healing, and much, much more. So that is the plan for today. Announcements. Go ahead and put the thing in speaker view. You can see me, you can see the notes. You guys know the deal by now. If you have questions, try to send a message to your TA and they will funnel the questions to me. We have got a review for the midterm this Wednesday, okay? So make sure that you are there for that and bring questions with you. And then the exam itself is during class time on Friday, okay? And I'll talk a little bit about how that will work. So, in terms of the review, okay, the way Wednesday is going to work, this is basically like a Q&A type thing, okay? So go ahead, you can download the essay questions, you can download the study guide, bring the questions to Wednesday's session. Quick question, will the review session be recorded? Yep. But it'll be just like a normal type thing like this. You guys will send questions through the chat, and then I will answer them live. Or I'll have the TAs answer them. Or I'll say I don't know the answer. One of those three things will happen. So that's going to happen Wednesday. Bring questions, and we'll do it in the Zoom thing here. Then on Friday, we've got the exam itself. And the way this works is you do not show up to the Zoom, all right? There is no Zoom on Friday. Just go on to D2L, and starting at 11 a.m., you're going to be able to access the exam, all right? Now, tomorrow or Wednesday morning, if you have accommodations, you get time and a half, something like that, I'm going to go ahead and input all of those things. So that is automatically going to be taken care of, right? If you've requested it and it's been approved by the DRC, I'll put that in, and your exam will just automatically last 75 minutes or something along those lines. The exam itself is going to be 50 minutes long, and it's going to, if you don't have accommodations, it will start at 11 a.m. and it will close at noon. And so what that means is that you've got to start the thing, if you want the full 50 minutes, you've got to start it by 11:10 in order to get the full 50 minutes in there. So that's the plan for the exam. The way it's actually going to work, we've got 25 multiple choice questions. TAs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have those ready by, Tuesday or something like that. And when I've got those done, I'm going to email you guys. And if you guys can just read through them and make sure that they're comprehensible and that they don't have really egregious errors. Minor errors, no big deal, but just make sure there's nothing really bad in there. Then I will also let you know, you'll also be able to see on there which essay question will be on there. The way the essay works, you have got 12 possibilities that everybody knows about. And one of those will be the actual essay question on the exam. So you'd have no excuse for not doing a fantastic job on the essay. You know it's going to be one of these 12. So over the course of the week, build some outlines for these things, or try your luck and just guess which one you think it's going to be, or don't do anything and just trust yourself to write a bomb-ass essay on Friday. What are the 12 possibilities? You can find those going to D2L. They should be under every day between now and Friday. So if you look at Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, you should be able to get the whole list of essay questions. And it'll be one of those. For the essay question, will we be writing it by hand or scanning it into D2L or typing? You're going to be typing, okay? So what you'll have is a little typey box, and you just do the typey into the typey box. Yeah, that's the plan. How long should the essay be? I'm not giving you any word count, anything along those lines. Your essay will be graded on the the quality and quantity of your response. I would think that something like a couple sentences would feel very short. And I think that something like, a short novel would probably be a little overkill. You don't need to do that. But somewhere in between is going to work just fine. Is there a certain format in the essay? Nope. One of the things I will do, okay, is I will, and maybe I'll have this for Wednesday actually. One of the things that I'll do is kind of tell you what I'm looking for in addition to whatever the specific content is. I will let you kind of know ahead of time what I'm looking for in terms of like specificity and any references you should be making to like particular sources and levels of detail and that sort of thing. Regardless of which question it is, there are going to be certain things I'm looking for in that kind of sense. So I will let you know that by Wednesday so that you guys have a sense for how detailed it should be. Okay, very good. Any other questions? Yeah. No, you don't need a works cited, but like, okay, so there's a lot of questions about like citations and works cited. You don't need like parenthetical citations or a works cited at the end, but it will be helpful to know like which authors and sources talk about things, right? So if you're talking about Zeus and you're talking about like, you bring up like Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound as an example of some way where he ends up being this very vindictive type person, that's great, right? You're giving me very specific evidence to support your claim. That's really good. You don't need like the parenthetical thing or like a bibliographic citation at the end or anything like that. But the fact that you've included who the author is and what the source is in support of your argument, that's the type of thing I'm looking for. All right, we are moving on. Is today's lecture going to be on the midterm? Yes, this is the last day of content, of like new content for the midterm. Wednesday's going to be all review, and then Friday's the exam itself. Okay, I'm turning the chat off for myself so we can get on and talk about my favorite thing to do, which is absolutely drinking wine in Greece. And if you are a dude like myself, you get to drink wine at the Symposium. So the Symposium in ancient Greece was kind of a male-only event. Unless you were a prostitute, you could then go and join the men. And this was this kind of time of celebration and drinking and sexuality and talking about politics. And basically the way this works, right, is that there's a big crater, which you're looking at over here in the middle of the room, right? And that's filled with the wine. You go put some in your cup, right? The wine is mixed here with water so that you don't get too wasted as you're going. And then, you fill it up in your cup over here, which is known as a kylix. And sometimes they would put like cute little eyes on the kylix, right? With this idea that they're building this metaphor that like, as you're drinking the wine, it's like peering into your soul and revealing who you like truly are. Now, when you finish your glass of wine, right, like everybody, the Greeks enjoyed a good drinking game, and the game's name was like kotobos. And so the way this would work is you'd take your kylix, you would hold it by the little handles that you see here, and you would flick the dregs, right, that little like kind of grainy stuff that settles to the bottle of wine, at something. It could be a target on the wall. Frequently, it was like a little thing that was like floating in the crater in the center of the room. And the idea was that like there was like a little cup or a little bowl in there. And if your flick was the thing that made that sink, you won the game. So kind of think of it as an ancient version of like beer pong or something like that. And you can see it depicted on a red figure vase over here. And then also on this wall painting from the site of Paestum down in southern Italy, right? So they're Greeks and Greek-influenced populations living in Italy, and you can see them down here hanging out at the Symposium playing their drinking game. And the kind of idea here, right, the way of thinking about wine in antiquity is that on the one hand, it can kind of turn you into this thoughtful person, make you self-reflective, give you great insight to the way that the world should work in world affairs and that sort of thing. And then it can also turn you into like a crazy, like satyr-like person who's just lost all control. And the goal of being a man in Greek society was to ride the line between those, to be able to drink and have this kind of self-reflective, thoughtful moment while not going all the way to being crazy drunk. But very, very frequently, people just got crazy drunk. There's actually a term, I forget it off the top of my head, but they had a term for the part in the Symposium when everybody got way too wasted and then poured out of the room the Symposium was in and just wandered the streets. It happened frequently enough where there was like a term to describe when in the night this happened. Okay, and then finally we talked about with Dionysus, right? The mystery cults. Right? And so you remember back to Demeter in the Eleusinian mysteries, we have something similar with Dionysus here, right? And the big difference is that with Demeter, we have a fair amount written about this in like textual format, so we know a little bit more about what happens. With Dionysus, it's very much from the archaeological record. And in particular, this building that we're looking at here, known as the Villa of the Mysteries at Pompeii. Like, pretty sweet house there. It's right in the kind of like suburbs of Pompeii. So like you have to actually walk outside the city walls and think of it very much as like a suburban villa, that sort of thing. Now, when you go inside of it, the reason it gets its name, the Villa of the Mysteries, is because this one room has these giant frescoes, right? Like floor to ceiling, depicting what we think are the Dionysian mystery, like initiation rites. So like initiation rites are part of what makes a mystery religion. And here we can see the initiate going through these different phases, right? So bringing in these kind of cookies or cakes, sitting at the table, folding some sort of garment. We've got her throwing that garment over her head over here. We can see the references to Dionysus down in the bottom left-hand corner, right? So the mask sticking out of the doorway there. We've got Silenus, who's one of the kind of minor divinities associated with Dionysus. Dionysus gets his poor head cut off by by 2,000 years of erosion, I guess. But you can identify him due to the thyrsus and the kind of throne that he's sitting on. And then we get to the dark part of the mysteries. And we can see the initiate being whipped over here by some sort of kind of like person wearing wings, that sort of thing. And then eventually she makes it through that kind of dark part and then is seated once again and clothed and then kind of sits as a full initiate into the Dionysian mysteries. So, what's the meaning of all this? Nobody really knows, right? Like, we know the idea of the mystery religion is that you go through some initiation process, but because it's heavily drawn from the archaeological record, in many ways, right, like, kind of your guess is as good as my guess, is as good as other people's guesses in terms of exactly what is going on here and exactly what this means. So let's move on now to our last two of the Olympian gods and goddesses, Artemis and Apollo, and we'll start with Artemis. Now, we have these two together because they're twins, right? So Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, as you can see on the vase over here, right? And she is the offspring, right? She's the daughter of Zeus and the goddess Leto, and we'll talk about how that happened in just a second. Now, when you're looking to identify Artemis, go ahead and look for the bow and the quiver and wild animals, right? So you can see all three of those. Do we have wild? Well, we have wild dogs there. We can see the bow and the quiver and this poor guy here being eaten by a bunch of dogs, which doesn't look fun at all, but we will talk about why that happens a little bit later. All right, so let's talk about the birth, and this covers both Artemis and Apollo. And the story starts like all stories start, with Zeus sneaking around on Hera and finding somebody else that he's rather attracted to. So he falls in love with the goddess Leto. And, there we go. And this time, he's so sneaky that he is able to get Leto pregnant without her even realizing it. Which, I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, but anyway, you probably shouldn't go around getting people pregnant without them realizing it. Don't get into that habit. Anyway, all right, so Leto is now pregnant. Hera does realize this, and as usual, she is absolutely furious. And so what she does is she first curses Leto and says she is not allowed to give birth anywhere on land, right? Anywhere on the world, on top of the world, she cannot do this. And in addition to that, she is going to be chased by an enormous beast known as the Python, right? Where we get our word python today, this giant serpent-like creature that you're looking at over here. So this is not really an ideal way to be pregnant, not being able to give birth on land, as well as, having a giant serpent-like python chasing you. So eventually, she hears of this kind of like magical floating island, right? So there's this island Delos, which is actually a real island in the Aegean today. But there's this magical floating island that wasn't attached to the land at the time. And she thought this is the place to actually give birth. So under kind of the cover of clouds, she sneaks off to this island and she actually like hangs from a tree. So even if like, however you interpret it, right? She is not on land, right? The island is floating and she is in a tree and she gives birth to her two twins, first to Artemis, and then Artemis helps her give birth to the second baby, Apollo. And as a result of this, as Artemis helps in this process, that's one of the reasons she becomes, in part, kind of a protector of women going through the process of labor. So, we have a depiction here, right, of Leto, and we have little Apollo and Artemis over here. And again, born on the island of Delos. And what happens afterwards is that after this process, Delos kind of like magically comes down back to Earth and it like attaches into the ocean and is now an island. And that island becomes sacred to the god Apollo. Okay. Yeah, so the island becomes sacred to Apollo. We'll talk more about Apollo later. When we're talking about Apollo, he's very much like, usually the gods have like kind of one main thing that they're the god of, and then there's like ancillary stuff, right? Hermes is like the messenger god, but then lots of other things. Athena is like wisdom and war, and then many other things. Apollo's just like all over the place without like kind of one main thing. So wisdom and music and healing and the sun, all of these different things. And you'll notice the lyre or the kithara over here. And hopefully you guys remember the story about how Apollo got this kithara from tiny baby Hermes, right? Who was there jamming on his like tortoiseshell lyre. Okay, now things are not done yet. So this all happens on the island of Delos. But unfortunately for Leto and Artemis and Apollo, the giant python is still chasing everybody around, okay? And so now that the kids are born though, Apollo from a young age, right, also the god of like archery, ends up stringing his bow and he starts to chase the python. And now Apollo's chasing the python all over the place, and it all comes to a head at the site of Delphi. And so Delphi is set up on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This is kind of a good shot from the kind of upper end of the site looking down on it. So you can see the theater here. You can see the Temple of Apollo right here. You can see one of the treasuries down here where the different city-states would leave gifts for the gods. And then you can see the kind of beautiful setting set up in the mountains. For my money, this is like, it doesn't get any better than this. When you combine like the awesomeness of the site itself with like the geographic like landscape setting of a site, like you can totally 100% imagine why people were like, this place is a sacred place. It's awesome. So Apollo, right, stringing his bow, and he strings the bow and he slays the python, and you can see this weird looking like python. It kind of looks like a dog python type thing with a tail, serpent. Anyway, that's what Peter Paul Rubens thought back in the 17th century. But Apollo slays the python, and the python falls, right? And it falls into this chasm, right? And this happens at the site of Delphi, and it's going down into this deep, dark chasm. And then once it gets down there, it starts rotting and giving off all these gases, right? These noxious fumes. And it turns out that this happened right below the site of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. And the idea is that if you've ever heard of the Oracle of Delphi, right? That the oracle is like these noxious fumes from this dead python that's like giving the oracle her prophetic abilities and sending her into this state of kind of like craziness or ecstasy in which she's delivering her prophecies. Now, in particular, right, so you guys should be kind of sort of familiar with the parts of a temple now, right? So we've got the peristyle or the columns, we've got the vestibule or the pronaos, we've got the naos right here, the main sanctuary, and then the adyton, this back area in the temple of Apollo, that's like the super, super, super sacred part of the temple. And this is where the oracle, the woman, the priestess of Apollo, would have operated. So she would have been there, and you can see kind of a depiction here. And the writings say that there is some sort of kind of gas coming up that inspired this kind of ability to be able to make these prophetic statements. Now, the priestess herself, a young woman, was known as the Pythia, right? So write down the Pythia. And right now that she's also operating from the adyton. And she gets the name the Pythia, right? Because of the python, right? So of course those two things are linked. And so when you hear the word Pythia, right, that's referring to the high priestess of Apollo, the one who is serving as the oracle, delivering the oracular prophecies. Now, just in case you're sitting there thinking like, well, that's an awful lot of power for a woman to have in ancient Greece, a society kind of where men try to take all the power. You know, basically there's like 6 dudes around, so she gives these prophecies almost incomprehensibly, and then it's these 6 priests of Apollo who interpret it for whoever asked the question. And so, you know, just more of the heteropatriarchy taking over everything. Anyway, the Pythia, priestess of Apollo, who we think of as the oracle of Delphi. All right, so Artemis herself, in addition to being the daughter of Leto, is also known and associated with wild animals, and we can see a couple of her epithets here highlighting that association. So we've got Potnia Theron, Agrotera, so the mistress of animals, Artemis of the wild, that sort of thing. And it's important to see here, right, that the kind of association of animals with Artemis, these are very much like wild animals, right? These are not domesticated animals. It's not for farming. She's not like the goddess of like cattle who do work for you, that sort of thing. She is the goddess of wild animals and of hunting. And we saw earlier, right, that she helped deliver Apollo. But Artemis is also one of the kind of goddesses of, one of the virgin goddesses, one of the 3 Olympian virgin goddesses, and then also serves as one of the protectors of virginity for young women in the ancient Greek world. And so we see Artemis over here, right? The other virgin goddesses, we've got Athena right here, right? You can tell Athena because of her helmet, right? And then we've got Hestia holding this little thing with the cloak over her head, the goddess of the hearth. All 3 of them virgin goddesses, and all kind of in their own way serving to protect the virginity of young women in ancient Greek society. All right, so we've talked a little bit about nymphs before, and Artemis is very closely associated with nymphs, right? These are these kind of minor divinities that tend to be associated with different aspects of nature, right? So you get woodland nymphs and river nymphs and sea nymphs all over the place. And they are kind of representative in some ways of kind of young women or young girls in ancient Greek society, and it's Artemis's job, just like it is for her to protect young women, to protect these young nymphs and keep them chaste and pure as well. Now, as you can imagine, with somebody like Zeus around, it's not an easy job to keep these young nymphs pure and chaste as they're supposed to be. And this is probably best highlighted by the story of Zeus and the young nymph Callisto. So Zeus and Callisto go out on a bunch of dates. They take it slow. Of course, none of that happens. Zeus turns himself into Artemis. And then he's like, "What up, baby? You want to make out?" And she's like, "Well, you're Artemis. You're my protector. I guess so." Weird power dynamics there. Anyway, he turns himself into Artemis and he makes out with Callisto. Now, one of the things that you can probably notice from these stories so far is that it never tends to be like the person who does the bad thing is never the one who like suffers the punishment, right? It's like, oh, this young nymph got tricked into making out with Zeus. Let's punish Zeus. No, never punish Zeus. Let's punish the poor nymph. And so Artemis gets angry at Callisto for not being a virgin anymore. That's victim shaming. That's bad. You shouldn't do that. And she turns Callisto into a bear with the idea that she will then hunt and kill her. But Zeus, before this happens, right? Zeus has these little moments of like, I don't know, trying to treat people well. And so he's like, no, you shouldn't be hunted. And so he takes Callisto and he takes her and he puts her up into the sky, right? As the constellation Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. And that's the part of the sky where you can see the Big Dipper today, right? Because you can kind of see that coming in over here. There's our Big Dipper. And so that's Callisto. And when you see the Big Dipper next time, right? And you're like outside looking at the stars, you know, having a nice romantic date with somebody, you can be like, did you know that that's part of Ursa Major? And Ursa Major is a representation of Callisto, one of the nymphs from ancient Greek mythology. And Zeus made out with her by turning himself into Artemis and kind of tricked her into making out and then put her in the sky. All right, there we go. Let's move on. So, Artemis and Actaeon. So, Artemis doesn't have much sympathy for people who like break this chastity, as you may have seen by that story. And this is also exemplified in the story of Artemis and Actaeon. And so Actaeon is our buff-looking dude here, right? He's this like bomb-ass hunter. He's just going through the forest, hunting things, killing things, looking super good. He's got his little pack of hunting dogs with him. And accidentally, he stumbles across Artemis and her nymphs. And they're all just like super naked and like taking a bath in the river, looking like babes. And Actaeon's like, whoa, my bad. Actaeon's like, my bad, right? Like, I will turn around. I didn't mean to be here. I was just hunting like a boss. Let me get out of here. And Artemis is like, absolutely not. I'm turning you into a deer. And so she turns him into a stag, a male deer. And that has problems to begin with. But it's really a problem because he's out with his hunting dogs. And so his hunting dogs are like, oh, a deer in the middle of us. And so they like start eating Actaeon in the form of the deer. Here you can see it portrayed Actaeon actually still as Actaeon. And so his own hunting dogs turn on him just because he accidentally wandered and saw like Artemis looking like a hot naked babe in the river. So, if you see Artemis like a hot naked babe in the river, don't let her see you. Go the other direction. Get out of there as quickly as possible. All right, so we've got Artemis and Callisto. That ending kind of poorly. We've got Artemis and Actaeon. That ending kind of poorly. And now we've got Artemis and Orion, right? You guys know Orion by his like famous belt in the sky, right? And we've actually got 3 different versions of the story here. You don't need to remember the specific details of each version. Just remember that it's associated with Artemis, that Orion is the hunter, and that in some way or another, he makes it from hunting kind of with Artemis or by Artemis or something like that into the constellation in the sky. So, version the first. We've got Artemis actually falling in love with a mortal man, with Orion, right? Now, this is kind of a problem because she's like one of the virgin goddesses. She shouldn't be getting busy with anybody. But Apollo is there, and he's like calling her out. And he's like, you're a virgin goddess. You should not be trying to make out with Orion. And we don't know. Maybe he's like a little bit jealous or whatever, but he's trying to shut this down. And so Apollo suggests we should have an archery contest. You see that little like thing, that little like fish or person or whatever swimming way out in the distance? Let's see which one of us is better at hitting it. And Artemis, right, goddess of the hunt, she's like, it's on, let's have the contest. So she pulls the bow, she shoots, boom, from like a mile away, she nails this guy with the bow. And only afterwards does she realize that that little person who was swimming so far away was the man that she was in love with, Orion, the hunter. And so she's so heartbroken that she takes Orion and she makes him look all buff like this, I guess, and then puts him up in the sky with the sword and the shield and, of course, his very famous belt. Version the second. All right. So in the second one, Orion is actually the aggressor in the relationship. So this time is Orion trying to kind of make out with Artemis, and she's like, I'm the virgin goddess. You can't have any of this. And then she shoots him full of arrows. And then in version the third, what we have is we have Artemis and Orion. And this is like my favorite one. They're like, it's like a buddy kind of like action story, right? So they're like hunting buddies and they go around and they're hunting everything. And they're like, I bet you can't hit that thing. And then he does. And then he's like, I bet you can't shoot that, like whatever. And then she does. And at some point in time, Orion starts getting a little cocky. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to kill all the animals. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, all of them. I'm going to shoot them all and hunt them all and kill them. Everywhere on Earth. And that is like probably a little bit of overkill. And so the other goddesses start getting in. So in some versions it's Hera, in other versions it's Gaia. And they're like, we probably shouldn't have Orion hunting all the animals in the world everywhere. So they send this like giant ass scorpion to go hunt Orion here, who looks like a caveman kind of. And so they send this giant ass scorpion to go hunt him. And then Artemis, like kind of like before anybody like actually dies, she takes them both and she's like, we need to preserve these. And she puts them up in the sky. And that's why you see Orion over here, right, with the club and the shield and his famous belt. But you always see him next to good old Scorpio, the scorpion, right, who he's doing battle with. So 3 different versions of Artemis and Orion, all of them ending in some version of Orion getting put into the sky as the constellation with his famous belt. All right, we're going to go ahead and skip over Hippolytus right now. Another story of Artemis and Hippolytus. Things get pretty weird. His stepmom wants to make out with him, and he's like, nah, you're my stepmom, that's pretty messed up. And she's like, well, I'm going to tell people you raped me if you don't make out with me. And he's like, that's super messed up. And then his dad kills him because he hears the rumor, and his own horses trample him to death. So you don't really remember the specifics there. It's pretty messed up. All right, so let's get on to the initiation rituals associated with Artemis, in particular, the Brauronia, right? And this is from the site of Brauron, maybe half an hour, 45 minutes southeast of Athens. Really, really delightful site, right next to the coast as well. And so this has something to do, the foundation myth of the site itself has something to do with these young girls playing the bear. And people don't really understand or know exactly what that means, but there's some sort of initiation activity where girls kind of go around acting like a bear or something along those lines, in addition to participating in other kind of initiatory rites. Now, the story itself starts with like a girl playing actually with some sort of bear. She gets scratched, her brothers come out and kill the bear, and then everybody gets really sick until this initiation ritual starts to happen. Now, this is another one of the things we don't have a ton of evidence from textual sources themselves, so we're relying on archaeological sources like this to figure out what's going on. So here's a pottery fragment from the site, and we can see here that it's some young girl participating in some sort of race or something along those lines. And from all the archaeological kind of remains here, we see different things associated with young girls, right? So we see things like this, we see little statues like this, we have those few textual references referring to like playing the bear. And what people make of this is that there was some sort of kind of transition initiation taking place with the kind of ritual of the Brauronia. And the idea is that these aristocratic families in Athens are sending out their young girls at some point in time to the site of Brauron. They go through this ritual, and then when they come back, they are like considered full women. So what you're looking at is some sort of kind of initiation rite that marks the transition, right, from kind of childhood, the childhood of a young girl to the adulthood of being a young woman. Another weird initiation rite we get is for young boys, and it takes place at the temple of Artemis Orthia, and this is a temple to Artemis near the site of Sparta. And what ends up happening is that the young boys kind of undergo some sort of some different tests and trials, and basically this is kind of the boy equivalent of trying to mark their transition from childhood to like being a boy in childhood to being an adult man. And so we get boys whipped at an altar. One of the things we get from the textual sources is that they're like supposed to steal like cheese from the altar. So I don't really know what's up with that, but they're trying to steal some sort of cheese. If they get caught, they get whipped. When they're getting whipped, if they like make any sound, they get whipped more. It sounds like kind of a dark sort of thing. It's kind of related to military training in Sparta. But again, the idea is that it's some sort of initiation, transition ritual where boys go in as boys and they're coming out the other side, more considered kind of adult men. Okay, let's go ahead and do attendance for the day. I don't know if this looks brown. It's supposed to be brown. The color for today is brown, so go ahead and get on D2L, and I will pick up in 2 minutes. Uh-oh, is it saying brown's wrong? Uh-oh, okay. Well, that's probably my bad. Let's blame the TAs. Jeez, TAs. Come on, guys. I can't believe you botched that one. All right. Enough in the chat. I see brown's wrong. I'll just give everybody credit for today. Let's move on. We got a lot to cover. I'll give everybody credit. Let's put that in the chat. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to close today talking about Apollo, the god of music and healing, and much, much more. So we already talked about the birth story of Apollo, right? And then after being born, like immediately getting to work hunting down the python, and where he hunts the python, right? Where he kills the python, that becomes one of the sites that's sacred to him. So we get Delos, the island on which he was born, and then we get Delphi, right? The site where he slays the python. For what it's worth, if you guys ever go to Greece, absolutely go to Delos. One of the super cool things is that it remains like a primarily religious island in antiquity. It's the center of a group of islands known as the Cyclades, kind of because they form like a circle type thing. Delos is kind of this sacred island at the middle of it. And it doesn't end up kind of getting built over in modernity. So the whole island is like a giant archaeological site. It's super cool. So Delos is a famous site associated with him. Delphi also associated with him. And we get our first appearance of Apollo in the Iliad, right? And so here in back-to-back scenes, we can see just how like different Apollo can be. So in scene 1, he's like taking the Trojan side and he's just destroying Greeks like nobody's business, right? He's got his bow, he's like shooting Greeks down, and he's just wrecking total chaos on the Greeks. And then in scene 2, he's like up on Olympus, like jamming on his lyre, right? Like looking like, oh, like I'm gonna sing myself a nice little song here and play my lyre. And so here we can see, again, Apollo, god of many different things, archery, as well as music, very different aspects. In addition to that, he is also the god of the healing arts, okay? And so we'll see that there are different gods associated with this, Apollo being one of them, and then his son Asclepius being another. So we see that from this sort of thing, right, he can basically unleash terror and plague upon a group of people, but he can also cure them. So the story of Apollo and Asclepius begins with Apollo's love for a mortal woman. And you think, like, nice Apollo jamming on his lyre, he's probably a great dude, right? He's got to be much better than Zeus at the very least. Not really. He's also awful. So he falls in love with this mortal woman, Coronis, and he gets her pregnant. But then after she's pregnant, she's like, nah, I don't need you anymore. I'm going to go sleep with this other dude. And Apollo does not take kindly to the idea that, like, he's been replaced by, like, a mortal guy. And so he throws her into a fire. And, you know, as, you know, many freshmen here at the university, you may be dating people. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Don't throw the other person into a fire. This is not something that you should do, right? If there's one thing that you learn from these Greek myths, right? Maybe like don't do exactly like the Greek gods do. So he throws her into a fire, and then afterwards he's like, yeah, she was pregnant with my kid. Hermes, can you go get that kid? He doesn't even go do it himself. He sends Hermes. So Hermes gets little baby Asclepius out of the fire, and then he goes and has him raised by the centaur Chiron. And Chiron is also the teacher of Achilles and Patroclus. So Chiron the centaur raises little Asclepius, and he's always recognizable over here by this rod that he has with the single serpent, right? So if you get a question where you get two different staffs with snakes on them, you should be able to differentiate which two those are, right? Like which one's the caduceus of Hermes, which one's the rod of Asclepius. And you heard about this, I think it was last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, I think it was last Friday. We talked about EPIDAUROS, right? So this is a site, maybe an hour or so away now. It used to be like pretty far to actually walk there, but now you can get there in like an hour. But this massive sanctuary known for its healing cult, right? So this cult to Asclepius, and we actually heard what some of the rituals were like, where people like go down underground and they sleep, and there are like snakes slithering around on the floor, and like during your sleep with these snakes, like if you get bit, that's really good luck and you're supposed to heal very soon, or you're supposed to like dream of whatever's going to heal you, and then you go tell the priests. And I don't know, the medicine left something to be desired, right? Later on, we get Hippocrates. We don't talk about him a lot in this class. Hippocrates' big invention is basically like telling people to like get enough sleep and drink water, which actually is like the best advice you can give, right? It's like stay hydrated, get enough sleep, take it easy for a while. It's better than like go down underground and get bit by some snakes, but there you go. Now, we talked a little bit about this, right? That Apollo is this oracular god. And so the most famous, of course, is the oracle at Delphi, right? Where the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, delivers these oracles in some sort of insane gibberish, and then they're interpreted by the priests of Apollo. But there are other oracles in other parts of the Greek world as well. So Didyma in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, another oracle there. And the idea is that these oracles deliver prophetic knowledge. Now the problem, of course, right, is that like these prophecies are very frequently ambiguous. So very famously, when King Croesus of the Lydians goes to the oracle and says like, should I go attack the Persian Empire? The oracle says, if you attack the Persians, a great empire will fall. And he's like, that's fantastic news. I'm going to defeat the Persians. And then he goes and fights them, and he gets just annihilated. And it turns out that was his own great empire that would fall. So you really got to beware when you go ask the oracle. So again, the idea is that it's in the back of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. There are these fumes coming up from something underground. They've actually done geological studies to see if there are any kind of like fault lines that might do that naturally. Other people have hypothesized that there's burning of some sort of incense or drug or plant or something like that that's causing these fumes and this kind of crazed ecstasy in which the Pythia would deliver these prophecies. So one of the stories associated both with the oracle and with Apollo is the story of Cassandra. And Cassandra is this Trojan princess, and she promises herself to Apollo. And then she takes back the promise, and she's like, nah, I'm good. I don't need to be your priestess. And Apollo's like, fine, I'm going to give you the gift of prophecy, but it's a prophecy that nobody believes. So she's like saying like things that actually will happen, but she's cursed because nobody ever ends up believing her. And here you can see the actual temple of Apollo at Delphi. Once again, with the kind of mountains in the background. Find a way to get over there. We'll talk more about study abroad stuff later on. It is awesome. The theater at Delphi, so you can see, just to give you a sense of where we are, you wind your way up something known as the Sacred Way. You pass treasuries where different city-states would keep their gifts for the god. Here's the actual temple of Apollo, and the priestess, the Pythia, would have been in the back over here. Above that is the theater for theatrical performances. And then above that, at the very, very top, you get a stadium. And there actually would have been athletic contests held here every 4 years. Think of it as kind of a different version of the Olympics. These were known as the Pythian Games because of the Python, the Pythia, all that good stuff. Let's go ahead. We will just say very quickly that Apollo is also associated with these initiation transition rituals. And the kind of biggest one is known as the Hyacinthia, and it's in honor of this young boy who Apollo accidentally kills. What ends up happening is he like throws a discus during some like sporting event, and he's Apollo, so he launches it like way too far. It hits this poor boy. He dies, and Apollo's love for this boy turns into a commemoration and a ritual, a 3-day long thing. In which first they mourn the guy, then they have this procession with athletic contests, and finally they celebrate. They celebrate the boy on the 3rd day. So the idea is both of these gods, right? Artemis and Apollo, both associated with initiation rituals and with this idea of kind of kids becoming adults. So in addition to their kind of main things, right? Music and healing, that sort of thing, the hunt. They are also both gods of initiations and transitions of kids becoming adults. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Start studying, bring questions for Wednesday. I will see you all then. Have a wonderful couple of days. All right, bye everyone.